All right, should we jump into the sequences themselves?
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. First one is Kahneman's planning anecdote.
And this one really would have gone good with last week, but we already had 3 and didn't want to expand it to 4.
Yeah, this is another sequence related to planning fallacy, my biggest weakness in life. Planning, my old nemesis.
Yes.
Can I sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of my biggest weaknesses is aging. If I could get over that, I'd have a lot of things figured out.
I guess I mean of the ones that I can currently work on. There are some things you can do it for aging, but not anything super significant yet.
My biggest weakness is that my skin is permeable to bullets and knives.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. It's still crack up a bit. Anyway, this whole sequence is an excerpt from one of Kahneman's psychology articles called Timid Choices and Bold Forecasts, Cognitive Perspectives on Risk-Taking. And we can link the full paper. I found it, it's like a 16-page PDF available for free online. I found it on JSTOR, and it's just, I think, open access. But the summary of the excerpt. So in 1976, Kahneman was on a team trying to develop a curriculum on judgment and decision-making under uncertainty for Israeli high school students. And after a year, the team met to discuss how long they thought this project was going to take to finish. And Kahneman wanted to make the conversation more productive, which I appreciate. So he had everybody write down how long they thought it was going to take before they had a complete draft ready for the Ministry of Education. And he says the estimates, including his own, ranged from 18 to 30 months. So then he asks one of the members who was an expert in curriculum development, so you've been doing this for a long time. In your experience, how long did other teams like ours take to complete their projects? And the expert says, of the ones he could think of, 40% never finished. For the rest, he couldn't think of any that took less than 7 years or more than 10 years. And also, he adds, Kahneman's team seems slightly below average in resources and potential. Which,
and the great part, yeah, and the great part is that he says that 40% chance of failure and then taking at least 7 years. Neither of these were outcomes that were an acceptable basis for continuing the project.
Yeah,
and
right?
So they ignored this.
Yeah, it says it was so demoralizing that they just ignored the expert's forecast and also stopped attempting any long-term planning. Yeah. And so the end of the excerpt is the project eventually reached completion 8 years later. Yes. However, in the comments, in the original LessWrong post, someone wrote, there exists a curriculum for the study of judgment and decision-making under uncertainty for high schools. Somebody spent 8 years developing it. Where can we get this curriculum? And in reply, somebody else linked to an article review of Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which I took a little clip out of. Part of the pleasure of this book is Kahneman's willingness to incorporate counter-arguments. He inspects his own misjudgments, including a painful decade sunk into a committee work for a high school textbook that never saw daylight, and he led the project. So apparently it actually never saw daylight after all that.
That is...
It's like they finished it, but 7 years after the planning window, and no one wanted to buy it when they were done or something.
Yeah, as a couple other people pointed out that the curriculum's going to be out of date now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I guess it at least informed his writing on Thinking Fast and Slow. So
yeah, maybe planning a curriculum is way harder than writing a book, but it shouldn't take. I was about to say it shouldn't take that long, but I'm not even an industry expert. So what's funny is if we're sitting down for a planning meeting at my job and someone's like, all right, well, the goal is try and get us out end of Q1 next year. What do you think we can get done in that time? I don't think that an acceptable answer would be, I don't think this is possible. So I wonder how much of that is just kind of inherited from the work environment to where saying that I don't think this is even doable, or that hey, look, I looked at the numbers, imagine you're sitting down with your friends to do a startup or something. And they're like, all right, well, what do you think the odds are of us getting to market by the end of the year? And I think that if you're the person who points out, be like, 80% of these never make it, past the whatever, even to the alpha phase, right? I don't think that they would let you come to the next meeting. But
there's a difference between a startup where that's kind of like understood, though, that like that's the risk you're taking, versus like something like this sounded like kind of more run of the mill.
Could be column A, little column A, little column B. The only startup I've worked at is a fairly like robust one, and I got in 6 years in, but at the beginning it was funded by one guy who was paying 3 engineering salaries, so like he clearly was at least gambling with the confidence that this would go to somewhere, because he was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get it going, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's you and your friends doing it in part-time, that's different. But trying to like actually sit down and start a company and with payroll, and I don't know, I've got to think that once you put your, not just like $50, but something like $300,000 a year into it, you're thinking, okay, yeah, this better go somewhere, right? Of course, too, if you're getting paid, you'll overcome some of the stumbling blocks that probably stop hobby projects from reaching completion.
Yeah.
Just trying to imagine working on something for 10 years and then having nothing to show for it afterwards.
It's like my career in the video game industry. Now, there are a few games that came out, none of them ever like hit it really big.
The real victory was the friends you made along the way.
Yeah.
Womp.
Or the stuff you learned along the way.
Yeah.
Maybe
not to work in the video games industry.
A lot of work is probably like that, though. Like, I mean, with accounting, you're just doing the same damn thing every quarter, and then the numbers go away and don't matter anymore. I would assume, like, anything where you're working on an assembly line or extracting resources, you don't see the finished product. You're just kind of doing the same thing every day. I guess maybe most jobs are like that. Or after 10 years, it feels like you haven't really done anything aside from getting paid.
I felt way more satisfied that I was like being useful to humanity when I was working like a food service job than when I was in the games industry. It would have been different if I was making games that people love that were really popular, but we switched from like a model of trying to make like dungeon crawlers and tank games and like web game stuff to clickbait mobile game bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, I was like, we're making like slot machines, which is just exploiting people's psychology. You're not even giving them a cool product in return. And then secondly, like, when you're working in food service, it's like, well, at least I'm providing people with food, which is one of the like basic necessities of life.
Yeah, I think the most profitable mobile game is Clash of Clans. And I think it just hit 8 years on the market, and I'm not sure what it's made, but some billions of dollars. And like comparing it to like the slot machine random nonsense cash grab apps that people just generate, put out for a month, try and make some money, and then start on the next one. Like this one at least offers a game underneath, and all the paid stuff is optional. So like it's not pay to win or pay to play, it's just pay to fast track, which you don't have to do. So like I don't know, I think that I
still don't get the psychology though. I tried playing it and I was just like, there's nothing fun here.
Oh yeah,
it feels like those kind of farming game type things where like it's basically a resource management game, but then the fact that you can also pay to get ahead like means that people are playing it in order to compete with friends, I guess.
Yes, but I mean, I think the main difference between like it and Farmville is that you get to build armies and attack other people's bases, and so like there's actually like a game component to it that isn't just click.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not a stellar AAA game that I recommend to anybody. But I'm just thinking of as far as successful mobile games that aren't at least complete crash grabs. They at least put work in to make it an actual game, even if that isn't like the main draw.
I want to create a game called Complete Cash Grab, where you pay $5 to attack like someone else on the map, and then they defend themselves by paying dollars, and whoever spends the most dollars wins.
There was an app briefly on the App Store, I think, called like I Am Very Rich.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. The 30-second version or the 10-second version is that basically it cost, I think, $50,000. And when you open the app, it displayed a picture of a diamond that said I'm very rich underneath. And I think the guy sold 3 of these.
Oh, he actually sold some.
Yeah.
Probably to teenagers in Dubai.
Nice.
Which, I mean, that's the thing, is this thing would have taken a few days to spit out and get approved by Apple. The fact that it got approved at all, they changed the rules and you can't do that anymore. But just make a quick 150K and
Jesus,
I mean, that sounds awesome.
My brother got a quick $20, or I guess half of that. Do you guys use the Google survey thing at all?
No.
every now and then, like roughly once a week, sometimes twice, they'll send you like a few quick questions, and for every question you answer, you get between 5 and 10 cents, and each one only takes a few seconds. And I've been doing it for a while, and you don't actually get money; you get Google Play credits.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
because I was going to say I've done Mechanical Turk, but that's something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, Google Play credits is oftentimes based on like, hey, where have you been recently? What did you spend money on? It's and you don't get money, you get Google Play credits. And I've used some of the credits before to like, rent a movie or whatever. But I was, if you don't use them within a year, they go away. And I was like at $25 in credits, and they were starting to go away as fast as I was earning them, just because I like didn't really have anything to spend them on. I'm like, I don't want anything from the Google Play store.
I don't want any of this crap.
Yeah, I bought a podcaster, which I really liked, and then I haven't, needed any other shit. And so my brother, who does, web development now, I told him, look, just put something real quick on Google Play for $20, and I'll buy it, and you'll get, the commission you can get from that. And so he made an app that does nothing and called it like the useless app or the app that does nothing or something. And I bought it, and so now he has some of that money. Because my money was, my Google Play credits were literally going away, and I would rather they go to my brother than to just disappear.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying, but that's actually really funny.
Yeah, I was kind of cool.
He could turn that into like an actual service till he got shut down, and be like, hey, you can buy money with my app that costs nothing to download, but then you spend Google credits on it. It needs to be through the purchase of the app, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Although perhaps you could buy like in-app tokens or something.
Yeah, right? But then he'd have to like put more work into it. This was something that he just threw together in 20 minutes.
Then I'm saying he advertises it as saying, get 90% of your Google coins back as cash, and that could be his service, and then he'd just Venmo the people the money, 90% of the money, and keep 10% for himself for his trouble.
That could
way off track, but I do want to point out that there's a business that will give you back most of the money of your gift cards that you receive for like holidays or birthdays. Which
I saw a guy pitching that on Shark Tank. I thought that was kind of funny.
Oh yeah, no, that's a thing, and it's hilarious that is a service that people need and use, but that's we're not on topic.
No, yeah, okay. So in that case, we should go on because we could just keep talking forever.
I'll restrain myself and drag us back into conjunction fallacy.
Huzzah.
Does anybody else like? When I was reading this one and the conjunction controversy, it was like the Conjunction Junction song was just stuck in my head.
Yes.
Schoolhouse Rock.
It wasn't when I read it, but now that you have said it, it will be forever after. So the conjunction fallacy is a whole bunch of examples, and I'm only going to pull out two quick ones so that we can cover what it is. It starts out with Bill. Bill is 34 years old. He's intelligent, but unimaginative, compulsive, and generally lifeless. In school, he was strong in math, but weak in social studies and humanities. And then it gives you a series of statements about Bill, and you have to rank them in order of how likely they are. I'm going to ignore most of them. The three important ones is Bill is an accountant, Bill plays jazz for a hobby, Bill is an accountant who plays jazz for a hobby. And the interesting thing is that the vast majority of subjects indicated that Bill was more likely to be an accountant than an accountant who played jazz, but he was more likely to be an accountant who played jazz than a jazz player. Which, if you think about it for a while, either Bill is an accountant or Bill plays jazz for a hobby has to be either one of those more likely than Bill is an accountant who plays jazz for a hobby. Because any subset of people who are accountants or who play jazz is not going to be 100%. Or even if they are, it would at most be equal, right? There would be no world in where it's more likely for someone to be an accountant who plays jazz than to just be someone who plays jazz.
Yeah. And the thing that Eliezer was pointing out was these people were supposed to rank these 6 propositions by probability, starting with most and ending with least. And then he points out that the conjunction rule of probability theory states that for all x and y, p of x and y is going to be less than or equal to p of y. So the probability of x and y are simultaneously true. That x and y are simultaneously true is always less than or equal to the probability that y is true. Violating this rule is called a conjunction fallacy, and yet when you give people these kinds of like thought experiment sorts of things. Like, here's this guy Bill, he's like this. People aren't thinking about probability, but there's a psychology thing that happens. Well, I don't know if Inish, if you wanted to like explain more of the.
Yeah, I'll give a couple more examples that were given in this. Another one was considering a regular 6-sided dice that has 4 green and 2 red sides. It's going to be rolled 20 times, and you have to select a sequence from a set of 3 that might show up, and if it shows up, you win $25. And one of the sequences options was red, green, red, red, red. And since green is on 4 out of the 6 and red is on 2 out of the 6, that's fairly unlikely. But, out of enough rolls, maybe that would eventually happen. Another one of the options was green, red, red, red. And if you'll notice a thing about these two, it's not immediately apparent, but if you stop to look at it for a second, red, red, red is strictly a subset of green, red, red. Because the second one is just the first one with green in front of it. So in any sequence of die rolls, if number 2 appears, number 1 will have to have appeared as well. But number 1 could appear without number 2 appearing. Yet, nonetheless, 65% of subjects chose sequence 2. In theory, because this seems to be more representative of the die, since it has a higher ratio of green to red sides, and the dice has a higher ratio of green to red sides. But again, strictly wrong, because there's no way you could get to without getting through number 1 and an extra condition on top of that as well.
Yeah, so it's almost the analog of the thing about Bill the accountant, where sort of, if you think about, like the word representativeness, people are kind of like, instead of thinking in terms of probability theory, they're kind of thinking in terms of representativeness and like pattern matching.
Yeah.
Or is what I think's going on?
Yeah, the second one feels fairer because it looks more like it's got more of a balance between green and red. And so at a non-probabilistic intuition at it, you're thinking, well, if I had to guess, I would say there'd be some number of greens and some number of reds. And the first one looks too red heavy. So I'll say 2, where it has a couple of greens and the same number of reds. But yeah, that's it is just the exact same pattern of 1 with a green before it. And that it's funny. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking too about the Bill example. I remember when I first learned about this in high school, it was like, I forget, it was Linda or Alice or some, 1970s girl name. And it was like, Alice is a feminist who is also a librarian or something. They give some vague description. And
if you want to wait just a little bit, that's literally the next post.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
that was
but
one
you
I
can
hadn't
go ahead
finished reading yet. Oh, that's the one. Yeah, perfect. Okay, yep, I will skip it. Anyway, that one did appear in my high school textbook. Yeah.
What was your experience with it when it did? Or maybe we should wait till you can tell us your experience.
We'll hold off and see if I can summon any memories from high school that are like not whatever, or that are autobiographical rather than just like data. But yeah, the third example is my favorite. It's easy to summarize because it feels less abstract, like mathy somehow than the first two. Certainly the second one feels like, you almost have to do math to see it, even though you really don't. But the third example was 1983, or published in 1983, and it was conducted in 1982 at the International Congress of Forecasting. The experimental subjects were 115 professional analysts employed by industry, universities, or research institutes. 2 different experimental groups were respectively asked to rate the probability of 2 different statements, each group seeing only one statement. 1. A complete suspension of diplomatic relations between the USA and the Soviet Union sometime in 1983. And 2. A Russian invasion of Poland and a complete suspension of diplomatic relations between the USA and the Soviet Union sometime in 1983. So you had 2 groups, each were asked one of those questions and asked, how likely do you think this is? The estimates of probability for both were low for both, but significantly lower for the first group than the second. Which, again, if you were able to see both at the same time, you would see how insane that is, because a complete suspension of diplomatic relations between USA and Soviet Union could happen for any number of reasons. But since 2 gave a reason, it just sounds more plausible. Oh, here's an explanation. Yeah, that sounds likely. Okay, yeah. So I would think it would, suspend disbelief or suspend diplomatic relations or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the moral.
Yeah, exactly.
Adding more detail or extra assumptions can make an event seem more plausible, even though the event necessarily becomes less probable.
And then it ends, do you have a favorite futurist? How many details do they track onto their amazing futuristic predictions? And I feel like I must have talked about this before because it sounds so familiar, but I remember watching something with Michio Kaku on TV like 10 years ago. And he was talking about how like, oh yeah, in 2030, we're going to have like interactive wallpaper that'll be your TV and your tablets and all this stuff will be all over your house. And there were a couple other things that he tacked into it. But what I found surprising, like, and didn't really articulate at the time, but looking back when I remembered it, was like, okay, so not only have you said we're going to have this exact stuff, but it'll do these things, and this is when we'll have it. Why not just say at some point in the future, or maybe we'll have something like this? But it was very finite. I mean, he didn't straight up come out and say it, at 6:30 in the morning on December 21st, 2030, we're going to launch this product. But he almost did, right?
Yeah. I was like maybe a little disappointed that they didn't get more into the psychology of why we think this way. Because when you do the first example, it's kind of like, okay, well, you can think that we're giving some details about this guy, Bill, and then here's more details. And if you think of, okay, well, maybe humans, when they're modeling other humans, are thinking of a story, or they're thinking of stereotypes of people. Like the feminist librarian one makes that one seem more obvious, because you're like stereotypes about librarians, or just like likelihoods about someone who is a librarian is likely to, they probably have a master's degree, they're probably well educated, but then the ones about the politics and the like probability of the dice doesn't. You're not telling a story in your head about dice, so it really seems to be something in the math part of our brain that's broken that way.
Well, if we want to get into the next post, that specifically does mention why this happens. Not mention, but explain why this happens.
Or how they nail it down.
Yes, this one is called Conjunction Controversy, and then parentheses, or how they nail it down. And boy, this was a long one. I'm going to skip a lot of it, but there was just a lot of discussion about methodology and various ways that they tried to test this thing and different techniques that they used. Like at one point, even just straight up asking people what they were thinking. But if you're interested in all the details, they are there, and it is, it's kind of interesting to read through it. But we want to get more to the meat of the things, which starts out with Linda, which, Stephen, would you like to take it away since you're familiar with Linda?
Sure. Linda is 31-year-old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she is deeply concerned with the issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Also, this was in 1982. Or no, it appears in the 1982 book. When was this conducted? It doesn't say. I'm going to guess in the 80s. Anyway. Please rank the following statements by the probability, using 1 for the most probable and 8 for the least probable. And I'm going to go through them quickly just to make the point. So remember, we've got an outspoken, very bright philosophy major who is concerned with discrimination and social justice and participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So 1, Linda is a teacher in elementary school. Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. Linda is active in the feminist movement. Linda is a psychiatric social worker. Linda is a member of the League of Women Voters. Linda is a bank teller. Linda is an insurance salesperson. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. And so the funny thing is that I can't remember which one is, without reading it again, which is the highest voted, but the last one was voted higher than Linda is active in the feminist movement. The last one was Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. And I think this one is easier to illustrate the point of at least part of what's happening, because you've got this model of Linda now. She, philosophy major, outspoken, concerned with social justice, participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. And to hear that she's a bank teller, you're like, well, that doesn't sound like the Linda I know that I learned about 10 seconds ago. Yeah. But then if you say, oh, and she's also in the feminist movement, you're like, oh, okay, that sounds likely. Maybe it wasn't more likely than... Let me see here. I should quickly read it.
If you look at the actual ratings, the most likely was that she's an active feminist. Second most likely was she's a bank teller and active and feminist, and least likely it was she's a bank teller.
Right, that's right. Yeah. But they still put that at higher than
than just active in the feminist movement. Bank teller and active was more likely, according to people.
No, bank teller and active was more likely than just bank teller.
Yeah, that's what I'm... Oh, okay.
And do you remember...
They had 6.2 for that one.
Yes, 8 is least probable, 1 is most probable.
Okay.
So the scale is kind of reversed.
Right.
Or the lower the number, the more probable something is. Stephen, do you remember, like, when you came across this, how you felt about it, or how your class reacted, or anything?
I don't. It's hard to distinguish any memories I'm trying to conjure from ones I'm making up. If I am running with my intuition that my memory is, give it 30% chance that this actually happened, I seem to have some inkling of a memory of people saying, of people defending their decision that the 8th one was likely, or likelier than just being a bank teller. And I think because for using the same sort of psychoanalysis reasons I was using earlier, right? Where it's like, well, no, but it said that she had all these things. It's like, yeah, sure. But the odds of that person turning out to be possibly just a bank teller are non-zero. And so any world where she's a bank teller and in the feminist movement would mean that she's also a bank teller. And so I think the easiest way, and I don't know if he does this in this long post because I didn't read this one. Nope, a line graph, no Venn diagrams. I think that either Venn diagrams or just circles with epicycles inside are the easiest way to illustrate this, right? You've got the whole space of possibilities of what she did. And in one circle, you've got Linda as a bank teller. And inside that, because it has to be inside that, inside the bank teller circle, is Linda as a bank teller and something else, right?
Yeah.
So you can have in the feminist movement as a bigger circle, but it's only going to be partially overlapping with the bank teller one. It's easier to visualize with a whiteboard.
Right. No matter how big the feminist movement circle is and how small the bank teller circle is, their intersection will always be equal to or smaller than the bank teller circle, because it just has to be.
Exactly. And that's actually a good way to think about it. Yeah, the circle where they intersect can't be bigger than one of the circles.
Yeah. So he goes through a whole lot of why people make this mistake, and eventually the researchers came to the conclusion that subjects substitute judgment of representativeness for judgment of probability, which means their feelings of similarity between each of the propositions and Linda's description determines how plausible it feels that each of the propositions is true of Linda. Since Linda more closely resembles a feminist than a feminist bank teller, that one is more likely, but she more closely resembles a feminist bank teller than just a bank teller, which is why that one feels more likely. And Eliezer asks, maybe that's our theory, but how could we possibly know that that is the case? And he said the answer was you take a different group of subjects and just ask them how much each of the propositions resembles Linda, and then compare their ratings of how much each proposition resembles Linda to how likely each person in the earlier group said each statement was likely to be. And he shows that this was done, and the correlation between the two groups on representativeness and probability was nearly perfect. 0.99, almost a straight line. So it was because people were thinking exactly that she looks more like a feminist than a feminist bank teller, but more like a feminist bank teller than a bank teller, even though if you were thinking with math, you would see how wrong that actually is.
I love it. And what's fun is that's the kind of creative approach to how do you, okay, well, this is what we think it is. How could we possibly test it? That's a very creative answer, to approach that problem. And that's why I really liked the field enough to go to school and learn more about it. That kind of creative problem approach.
There's a few ways that they tried to test, just to really make sure that this bias was happening too. Where it was in the previous one too. It was they said that to make sure that people weren't just misunderstanding the word probability, that was why they were. This is really long.
Yeah, it really is. He makes a similar example. They did the same thing with doctors judging what symptoms are likely to present.
They did the bet part to make sure that people weren't just misunderstanding what was meant by probability. And then they said, well, it might have just been that people were thinking B to mean only B and not A. And so that was the one with the doctors where they worded the instructions, the probability they will be among the conditions experienced by the patient, and then an explicit reminder, the patient could experience more than one of these conditions.
Yeah. And they still ran into the conjunction fallacy, but then also found the probability rank and representative rank exceeded 95% when they did the secondary test.
Yeah. I still wish that they had gotten into
I think without... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Why, or some hypotheses of why our brains might be wired like this. Maybe it is just that we think of everything as people and having a story, the way sort of animism works, where even if you're thinking about a die or dice, awkward plurals in English, you're still kind of thinking about, well, the red guy and the green guy. I don't know.
It hasn't been 6 in a while. It's bound to be 6 one of these times. Just a supernatural way to think. A supernatural but wrong way to think about die, right?
You could see why you might think that about some things in nature, though.
Yeah, no, I mean for sure. I think that it's. I don't know. It doesn't get into here much, but without treading into the waters of evolutionary psychology, I think that's about as far as we can get. I think it's understandable how our brains didn't evolve to do math, and so it evolved to say, well, how reasonable does that sound? And reasonableness doesn't necessarily relate to mathematics in our apish brains, right?
Yeah, I mean, we did kind of evolve to be human pattern matchers, since I think we were primarily our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, we're social manipulators, and as well, or that still makes it seem bad. I'm trying not to put a value judgment in there. We evolved mostly to understand and work well with one another because we're a social species. There.
There's a lot of PvP in our human experience.
And that, yeah. The second half though of the sequence is just, I think Eliezer actually uses the phrase hammering it down, or well, he says nailing it down, but why do I keep hammering on this? Well, it's because this fallacy, the conjunction fallacy, he says, was probably the single most questioned bias ever introduced, which means it now ranks among the best replicated.
Yeah, I like that. He says, he continues saying, questioning in science calls forth answers, and links that over to the proper use of doubt sequence post.
Yeah, which
is a great thing about science. This is how you summon answers, by questioning things. It is almost an eldritch ritual.
I emphasize this because it seems when I talk about biases, especially to audiences not previously familiar with the field, a lot of people want to be charitable to the experimental subjects, but it's not only experimental subjects who deserve charity.
He says scientists can also be unstupid. Someone else has already thought of your alternative interpretation. Someone else may have already devised an experiment to test it. Maybe more than one.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's, when you read these kind of studies, psychological studies, it often feels like you're trying to trick people. And that's why these subjects didn't know what was going on, and these scientists tricked them, and I've got to defend them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've encountered that attitude before, and that's weird, where oh, well, studies show this. It's well, the people probably were doing this, this, and this in the study. They didn't realize that the researchers were going to blah, blah, blah. I'm just, I think you're misunderstanding the point of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the one hand, I totally agree with him, especially, well, okay, so real quick, he also says, a blank map is not a blank territory. If you don't know whether someone has tested it, that doesn't mean no one has tested it. And so all the sequences were written before the replication crisis, which it kind of makes the whole thing it puts it in a different light, because yes, he is correct, and lots of these things have been multiple times tested and verified, but there's also a number of things which weren't and were just accepted as common wisdom. And when the replication crisis hit and people started trying to replicate this stuff, they fell apart. And I think a lot of people nowadays are a bit more wary about things specifically because of that. Things that they were told were rock solid turned out not to be so much.
Yeah,
we'll have to get a sorry, I was just going to say, we'll have to get a psychologist on at some point who knows all the modern stuff. I've got somebody in mind if they're interested to talk about, like, cool. So you use the word fall apart. I think more like things are shown to have holes in them. Like, I don't know how much of the edifice of our last century of knowledge, especially like in social psych, completely fell to pieces. Like, whether or not you can get somebody to sit in a room filling with smoke because, bystander effect or whatever, that there might be reasons explaining what was going wrong with how that experiment was done in the whatever decade it took place in. But bystander effect is still probably definitely a real thing with or without that experiment. And we can devise better ones that have demonstrated the same thing. But like that one in particular doesn't replicate or has problems with it, right?
Yeah. Well, like the conjunction fallacy, and specifically, he says it's one of the most questioned biases ever, and which is why it has so much replications and so much proof behind it. But there were lots of other things that, like, it turned out were just researchers literally manipulating people, like in the case of the, the Stanford prison experiment?
Right.
And yeah, there were some that were just like really bad methodology from the very beginning, where someone was just trying to make a point and didn't care what kind of trickery they had to do to make it.
Yeah, it's I think it's worth noting that from what I remember of like this period of the rationality community, a lot of people were talking about this, and I think in the scientific community too, although I wasn't part of that at the time. But like people, you see Eliezer being like, science is great because we can replicate this stuff, and like we can know things about the world because like there are facts about the way the universe is that we can test and we can retest. And what like actually caused the replication crisis was more of the publisher perish sort of model that we pursue science through, where there's no prestige really to be had for replicating studies. Like grant money is going to people discovering new things, and
negative results never get published.
Yeah.
Because they aren't sexy.
But it's still human biases that are causing us to get the wrong results, which is why I'm not sure what point I'm trying to make here. I guess
I got this, I like the way he expressed the frustration at the end here. He says, it does become a little frustrating sometimes to know about this overwhelming mountain of evidence that from thousands of experiments, but other people have no clue that it exists. After all, if there are other experiments supporting the result, why haven't they heard of them? It's a small tribe. Surely they would have heard. By the same token, I have to make a conscious effort to remember that other people don't know about the evidence, and they aren't deliberately ignoring it in order to annoy me. Which is why it gets a little frustrating sometimes. We just aren't built for worlds of 6 billion people. It's a very big tribe. But at the very end, he does say, I'm not saying, of course, that people should stop asking questions. If you stop asking questions, you'll never find out about the mountains of experimental evidence. Faith is not understanding, only belief in a password. So, yeah, don't stop asking. Keep looking. Try to replicate and disconfirm and shit.
Yeah, but in good faith.
Yes.
Not because you don't like where the evidence is going or something.
Yeah. The whole ending, the whole second half of this sequence post kind of reminded me also of Scott Alexander's post. Yes, we've noticed the skulls, where he talks about the researchers saying, yes, we are aware of these things that people keep pointing out to us.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was